Support for RotoGrinders is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Manscaped offers precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. They obsess over their technology developments to provide you with the best tools for your grooming experience. That's why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. The Manscaped engineering team spent 18 months perfecting the greatest ball hair trimmer ever created, and just released the new and improved Lawnmower 3.0. Their third-generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to the advanced skin-safe technology pioneered by Manscaped. When I tell you this is premium, I mean premium. The battery will last up to 90 minutes. I don't know why you'll need it for 90 minutes. It doesn't take me that long, but if you don't want to recharge it, you could take the longest shave you ever could possibly dream of. The waterproof technology allows you to groom in the shower if you want. One of the coolest features is the LED light, which illuminates grooming areas for a closer and more precise trimming, and sometimes to kind of show off for your significant other. A little extra lighting. They also upgraded to a 7,000 RPM motor with quiet stroke technology. And let's not forget about the charging stand. Show your mower off loud and proud, because this intelligently designed stand is a convenient charging dock powered by USB. If you're listening to me speak right now, if you're seeing me around the world today, I want you to experience it firsthand for yourself. Trim that junk of yours, right? You want to trim the bad players in your lineups? You should also trim your junk too. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code ROTO, ROTO, at manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code ROTO, ROTO, at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping. Manscaped.com, and use the code ROTO, ROTO. Your balls will thank you. Welcome, grinders, to the Advanced Sports Analytics Show. I'm Jordan Cooper, your host for this year. Last year we had Travis. I filled in a couple of times. They like me so much, I'm going to be here all year with the two main men of Advanced Sports Analytics. I mean, me and Stuart Gibson, we go way back. We did a couple of shows last week, and then the main man who me and Brandon, we both have very similar backgrounds. I regularly, at least to myself, refer to Brandon Adams as the more successful version of me. So welcome, guys, for a new season, a COVID season, a no preseason season. What's going on this year for Advanced Sports Analytics?
Well, I have to say that we love Travis, but we decided that your quirky mind fits us just perfectly, and we made a strong bid to get you as the host. I'm happy. The bid
you had it's like Price is Right. You just had to bid $1.
Yeah, Stuart and I, we think we have a unique way of approaching the game, and I find that your approach fits our way of thinking about things just right. And I will have to tell you something. Stuart is so committed to you that he purchased your audio course.
No, I know, I saw, and hopefully maybe in addition to doing well with the models, that maybe he could actually win a GPP one of these days.
Yeah, I'm working my way through it. I find, honestly, it's very difficult to absorb while I'm working on coding. Like, I think I have kind of a one-track mind, so I try to put it on in the background and then just blank out on either one or the other. It's kind of a counterproductive way to work, but I'm going to try to kind of make time for it while walking the dog and just kind of doing some stuff around the house. Definitely going to try to continue to work my way through it. I don't know if you can you see my progress?
I think I can. Have you reached the vomit stack section?
I don't think so. I was particularly interested in the kind of player selection portion, because that's kind of up my alley and aligns with kind of how I'm thinking about ASA and just general DFS. But yeah, I'm super excited for our content this season. I think in the early stages, we've been working to lay the foundation with, just basic stuff like projections, which I know may or may not have that much use for this show. We're probably going to try to be thinking more off the wall. But yeah, as the season continues, definitely want to build out some tools around correlation. Our projections right now are like point projection, median point projections, but thinking about projections as a distribution outcomes, I think is super important. And you don't see a ton of stuff out there with super good distributional projections or, blending projections with range of outcomes plus correlation. I definitely think that's a direction we want to head as the season continues, and we'll kind of work to build out those tools as the season continues.
Yeah, I'm sure you know, Jordan, that the foundational idea of advanced sports analytics was that we kind of surveyed the landscape about 4 years ago now, and we were like, okay, where are the holes? And basically what we found is that there was very good median projection stuff out there, and there was very good slate by slate write-ups out there, and we didn't see a way that we could improve on that. But we noticed that there was weak data on distributions and correlations, and we thought that this was extremely important for tournaments. And that's been basically the founding idea of advanced sports analytics. Now, we don't do ownership, which would be the, if you have distribution, if you have correlation, if you have ownership and you have projections, that's the whole package. We don't have ownership on the thinking that there are people out there that specialize in it, just comparative advantage, we'll leave it to them. We are starting to build out projections, so we're reaching into that, and we think we have some very unique data for tournament players, and we kind of see it as a must-use resource for tournament players.
Right, because the real key detail when it comes to tournaments is not necessarily predicting who is going to do well, but who is more likely to do well in comparison to how much they're owned. And it may sound similar, but to a lot of average DFS players, it's, well, Devontae Adams is most likely to do well, and he's going to be 18% owned. It's like, well, is that his efficient ownership? If he's going to be owned at about the same rate that he smashes, or he becomes like GPP relevant, you need to have them in a winning lineup, then it's kind of a wash. If you constantly roster those players in a lineup with one another, then you're not going to win the Millie Maker that way, because it's just, you don't have enough leverage that way. But when you roster the 4% owned player that has an 8% chance of being in the winning lineup, that's where you get your expected value from. And of course, you need a large sample size of slates in order to realize that EV. But that's kind of the crux of like when you mentioned that I have a weird mind, like for GPP players, it's not really a weird mind. Like you have to think that way in order to build lineups that have the best, first place equity in these contests that have 200, 300,000 people in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the industry is increasingly going to that type of contest, the top heavy contest where median projections are not the most important thing, right?
Right, but if you're playing double up, sure, but like when people look at the difference between, I view it from a game theory perspective. I'm always looking at the data that will affect a decision dramatically. So when if I'm weighing the difference between two players, and one has a median projection of 18.4 and one has a median projection of 18.25, like, is that dramatic where it's like, well, who's better? It's like, you'd have to play this slate out 10,000 times to even realize that difference in median. But if one guy is twice as owned as the other guy, then it just makes the choice easy to me. That I'm not looking for the better player. I'm looking for the better player in comparison to their ownership. And those marginal differences in the projections, I know a lot of people that do projection models over the long haul. Yes, you'll get that player is slightly better over the long run, but in the span of 1 week, the difference between two guys with a median of even 2 or 3 points to one another, the results could be the difference of 30 points. So thinking in terms of medians, that's why what you're doing at ASA, where you should look at the median as if it's a distribution curve and not just a number.
Absolutely. So I think that since we do have you, it would be wise to spend maybe 20 minutes, an unusual amount of time, talking about macro strategy on these slates. And then we'll spend 40 minutes going in play by play, position by position. We do have some special things to say about certain positions. So maybe that would be a good way to do it. We spend 20 minutes talking about macro strategy, then 40 minutes talking about position by position. In terms of macro strategy, we'll focus on Draftkings and we'll focus on the $1 million tournaments, the $1 million top prize tournaments. You've got the $5 ultra large field and then the $100 large field. So we'll focus on those. There's a certain spiel we have at ASA that you probably heard me give last year. Stuart and I have done a lot of work on opportunity in games, fantasy opportunity in games. And one interesting finding is that the over-under, which is the overwhelming focus of fantasy players, is a median number. But what you care about for fantasy purposes is the probability of a game truly going off, right? So like there's a tendency for fantasy players to be fixated on the over-under number. But a wiser way to look at it would be, what is the probability of each game having a cumulative number of points over 55 points, over 60 points, over 65 points, over 70 points, like that. And our data suggests that the probability of a game going off, say having over 70 points scored, is even more influenced than you might think by the over-under number. In other words, like the game that has an over-under of 42, they have more than 70 fantasy points scored almost never. Whereas intuitively, like you kind of think you can recall some games that went off that had the over-under 42. Happens almost never. And it's far, far more likely to happen for the over-under of 50 than it is for the over-under of 45. And this is something that fantasy players kind of know intuitively, but it's one of those findings. It's even more true than you think. It's even more true than you think that you should focus your fantasy output on high over-under games, because those games are much more likely to go off than the other games. And it's also true that when they do go off, when they do have that, say, over 70 score or whatever, more positions in the game than you might think go off. So this is something that the fantasy community didn't generally appreciate like 4 years ago, but they learned fairly quickly that you could win a large field with a lot of players in the same game. It's not intuitively obvious, but it comes through in our numbers, and now fantasy players just kind of know it. Partially, Jordan, you mentioned in your podcast that you spend a lot of time studying the lineups of top players. I think partially the fantasy community has learned this by studying the lineups of Chipotle Addict every week and all other top players, where they look at it and they're like, wow, he's got a lot of lineups that have a lot of players from the same games. And yeah, that's coming straight from the data.
Right. But I mean, a lot of times I'm not necessarily looking, like what you're talking about is looking for the games that have the most likelihood of having a +1 standard deviation of their median over under. So like if they have a 49, that it's going to put up 65. If they can have 42, it's going to put up 54. But
well, they just have a wider distribution, period.
Right. But I'm also comparing that to the salary. Like to me, like my vomit stack type of mentality is that, like, we take a look at this week. I think the game that stands out of Tampa Bay and New Orleans, high over under, probably a high chance of, as out of all the games compared to like Bills Jets, of putting up 60, 70, 75 points. But also in that game, you have like if you stack that game, you have like no money left. Like the only way, like you need comparatively higher standard deviation. You need to get closer to that 1 standard deviation to have a lineup where you're stacking Brady with Godwin and Evans and running it back with Kamara and Thomas. And then you're basically punting with 3K guys the rest of the, like, you need 70 points for that game stack for like a 3+2. Yet in a game like, for instance, like Washington, Philadelphia, lower total, less likely to put up 65 points. But I mean, the pieces are cheap. Gibson's cheap. McLaurin's cheap. Like, I don't need I need a standard deviation, but the standard deviation is not going to be 70. It may be, instead of the Eagles putting up 24 points as the implied total, I just need them to put up 35, and I need the Redskins to put up 21. And that game stack, that could be the winning game stack, even with a 54 point total, only because the salary adjusted value of that game is much lower. And that's why I don't tend to stack expensive games, because even though they're more likely, like if I don't get that top end standard deviation, like the whole stack is dead. Like you just did not get enough points for the salary that I would have much rather had a game that had a 42 total end up at 54. Would that at least be somewhat accurate?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Like I would far prefer the characteristics of like Seattle, Atlanta than the games that you mentioned. But I'm absolutely with you that the Philly Washington game, it's like, to me, that would be a different tier than the Atlanta Seattle game, like a different tier of interest for me. Because I do think that the Atlanta Seattle game is much more likely to have the very high number of points scored.
Also the comparative salaries are at least manageable. Like the pieces of the game, like we take a look at the Seattle, like to stack Lockett and DK Metcalf, or include a Will Disley or a Chris Carson, like they're not that expensive. And then you could run it back with a Ridley who's manageable, Julio Jones. If you want to run it the Ryan route and have Hayden Hurst in there, like you have cheap pieces to at least make a 3+2 or even a 3+3, where you're at least plugging in a flex spot that is like a decent, like workhorse running back type. I'm just looking at the ones where, like we see with the Chiefs a lot of times. Like the Chiefs were facing the Saints. Like you could say the over-under could be 57 in that game, but to stack 3+3 is almost impossible. So like I look for that middle ground. I just use the Eagles and the Washington football team as an example. But just it's a game that has cheaper pieces. So I'm not looking at the Bills Jets, but I'm looking at the Lions Bears. I'm looking at like kind of like the mid-range, where the quarterback is not like the highest priced guy, because quarterback scoring tends to be very narrow range. That alone is not going to win you a GPP, but the stack may. So like the ones with the expensive quarterbacks, Russell Wilson, 7K, even a 300-yard game with 2 touchdowns may not be enough for the stack unless he just happens to be the highest scoring quarterback. But that's why, like, I'm looking for the cheap quarterbacks. So I could pair cheap quarterbacks with 2 good receivers, 2 good run backs, including a running back, and then still have a flex spot where I could plug in a Dalvin Cook or something and get 20, 22 points or something. So, like, to me, I'm always looking comparatively to the salary and the ownership. Because obviously, high total game, you get plenty of ownership. So if you're going to create a 3+2 where all the guys are like 15, 20% owned, like now you have to hope that it goes for 70 points. And then you have to hope that you got the pieces around it, because now you're competing with like 1,000 other lineups. So, like, I'm not saying that you're right from a macro level, but looking at the micro of what types of lineups that I want to create, I think I give a little bit more credence to those mid-range games that have manageable stack sizes.
And I think you, even with that strategy, Jordan, you probably do have some opportunity to still get exposure to that massive game where maybe you're taking pieces from that game, but not necessarily building your core, through that game.
Right. I'll have Michael Thomas one-off. I'll have a Julio Jones one-off. I may have a Calvin. I mean, I may love those games. But the stack how often will that stack hit for the ownership and for the expense of the stack? Because the more expensive it is, if you told me I could get a 5K quarterback with their 2 main receivers that are going to get 20+% target shares, and they're both 4K, and then the opposing running back who's going to get 25 carries and 4 catches is 5,800. Like, to me, that's the best stack, because it's like how much do I need out of that? If that's a 42 total and it goes to 54, like, the rest of my lineup is Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, and Austin Eckler, and there you go. I got the good pieces. I got a Michael Thomas in my 3rd wide receiver slot. So, like, typically I'm looking for those types of stacks, and then the rest of my lineup, because typically those types of stacks are lower owned, that I don't need to worry about leverage anymore, even for a milli maker type of tournament. It's kind of like, let me get the 3+1, the 3+2. That combined stack is less than 1% owned as a 5-person stack. So just basically, I'm just plugging the best plays. Give me the best plays with it. And if that stack goes off, I win.
Well, okay, let's talk about a different aspect of macro strategy for a second. You mentioned McCaffrey and Cook. I will 100% have 0 McCaffrey, 100%. No chance that he's in any of my lineups for those top-heavy tournaments. And Draftkings pricing, Cook will be underweight by a good bit.
Well, I understand McCaffrey, because if you actually look at even last year, he put up great numbers, but like most of the time you didn't even need him to win. It was actually cost prohibitive for you to have him in your lineup.
Yeah. Well, there's a few different reasons why I would never have him in there.
Can you fill us in? Very shady, kind of like, I'm not going to have him, but I kind of don't want to tell you why.
It basically comes down to, we sometimes treat running backs in football like it's golf or something. Okay. Of course, Rory is he's going to be in the top few every year, right? Dustin's going to be in the top few every year. There's like a lot of stability to it year by year, but somebody like Gurley has a big year, and we treat it as if it's extremely likely to repeat itself. When at the running back position, it often does not repeat. Now, look, it sets up nicely for it to repeat for McCaffrey. So in terms of millionaire maker strategy, the reason I'll have 0, it actually has nothing to do with Christian McCaffrey. It's really more about the $10,000 price. And again, looking at the advanced sports analytics data in a macro kind of way, if you wanted to summarize the distributional data, the distributional data suggests that the typical millionaire maker strategy should be pay down for QB, pay down for running backs, pay up for wide receivers, pay down for defenses, tight end question mark, right? But the reason to pay down for running backs less so than wide receivers is because wide receivers, the elite wide receivers have access to a ceiling that the low-priced wide receivers reach never. And they also, the Julios have access to a ceiling that the mid-tier receivers are extremely unlikely to reach. So they really are in their own category in a way that the running backs are not. An alternative way to think about the same idea is that let's say I'm making 50 lineups for the $100 contest with the million up top. Okay. I can approximate my expected value by just trying to maximize the probability of first place with those 50 entries. The reason I'll have a lot of Devontae Adams and Julio, Michael Thomas, is because they have access to a very unique ceiling. And furthermore, in their good weeks, although this hasn't necessarily been true the past 2 years, but it is true the past 10 years, in their very best weeks, they will also blow away the top running back scores. Like a very good score for them is better than a very good running back score. And so I will tend to play those guys and be cheap at running back because I feel like I can't replicate those top wide receiver scores with like a good week from Tyler Boyd or something. However, if you give me 5 different lineups, I can come up with different combinations of running backs that can match the McCaffrey score. In terms of replacement, it's much more likely with a few shots on goal to be able to approximate a McCaffrey production for 60% of the cost or 50% of the cost than you are to be able to replicate like a good week from Michael Thomas or Julio. So for me, my preferred construction will be low to mid at running back and high at wide receiver, and flex will tend to be wide receiver.
I'm with you completely, but I'm using that as my one-offs. So like when you say like Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Michael Thomas this week, like I'm also typically I'm very exposed to those wide receivers as my wide receiver 3 in a stack, a 3+1 type of stack, or in the flex using 4 wide receivers. But I'm also exposed to the Austin Ecklers, Josh Jacobs. Like I'm also exposed to even the cheap running backs. We have some 5K running backs, Gurley this week in the 6K range that could replicate an 8K running back score. But I'm typically not building the stacks around them. I'm building the stacks in the way of what games based on their price, based on the ownership, could go closer to the +1 standard deviation range, and then filling in. Like I don't look at like the cheap running backs and go, okay, well I want to play some Marlon Mack this week, and then how do I find some ways to get the 3 Jaguars into my lineup? And I go, no, I could just play Marlon Mack as a one-off, as a cheaper running back in a different stack. But like I'm not necessarily building like Julio Jones or Devontae Adams. Like, are you telling me that like this week especially, like do you want to play Kirk Cousins? Do you want to play Thielen, Cousins, Olabisi Johnson, and Adams and Lazard? As it includes Julio, it includes Devontae Adams. But like I think that's extremely useful when it comes to what one-offs but I don't necessarily. Do you factor that into your stacks?
Well, to be clear, I don't think this is a week where stacking is especially important. Like stacking is not absolutely central to what I'm doing this week. I would rather have a good like lineup construction with good upside than to try to be particularly oriented towards stacks.
Is there a reason for this week? Is it big? I mean, a big thing about this week, we don't have a preseason. We have tons of groupthink of what people think the teams are going to do. Obviously rust, whether it be offensively or defensively. I mean, is the reason why, like, do you just not think that there may not be any game that's worth stacking?
Yeah, it really, for me, it comes down to the idea that I think that the majority of lineups in these contests will be dead because they make a mistake at one or more positions in choosing someone that possibly has a good median projection but has no pop. And I just want to have a lot of lineups that don't have that mistake, that have reasonable correlation, but they're not focused on stacking, and they have players that collectively can hit a very high ceiling. So I'm just focused on that, like high upside lineups, and I'm not especially focused on stacking this week.
Do you not feel that with kind of the uncertainty that we can expect in this early stage of the season, that maybe, like, to me, I think trying to really hit all the individual plays as opposed to going with stacks makes more sense when there is a ton of clarity around players' roles, but with so much uncertainty, to me, and perhaps, incorrectly, I feel like maybe in the early stages, it might make more sense to, rather than try to identify specific players who are in exceptional individual positions, just identify teams that are, as a collection, strong, valuable, and, not try to be too fine in our attempt to kind of find the optimal players. Does that seem valid, or you think with the uncertainty, there's maybe more credence to trying to chase individual plays as opposed to collection of plays?
I lean towards the individual plays, especially like this week. I know what I can do well. I can construct good, high quality, high upside lineups with some good correlation. I know that I can do that well. I don't think that I can say special things about what's likely to happen on any given teams. I kind of think that this is a week of maximal uncertainty where there are a fair number of teams that I would rather just not try to say anything about. So just, it might be like a third of the teams, right? Like, I live in Miami and I can't make any projections about what that Miami New England game is going to be like. And I don't know if my collective lineups are going to be any the worse for that. You know what I'm saying?
I get what you're saying, but I actually embrace that. Like, my style of play is to, I embrace that people don't know. People are going to gravitate to either what they know or what they think they know. So, like, what they know is kind of like, we look at Devontae Adams. And it's like, okay, we know that. We've seen the Packers. We've seen the Vikings. Like, yeah, without Diggs, people are just assuming that, oh, Thielen's going to get the targets. Well, who says Olabisi Johnson doesn't come in and act like Stephon Diggs and at 2% owned gets 100 yards on 8 receptions? I mean, yes, it's a low probability result, but we don't know. So people are going to wait and see. I'm not saying that I'm playing 30% of him, but if he's cheap enough, I'll play him. But then we have the guys that we think that we know, the Antonio Gibsons, where people, he's 4K and the Redskins, they got rid of AP and, oh, I think he's going to get 20 touches this game. Like, really? He's never played a down in the National Football League. He's going to be 20+% owned. Yes, He could, yes, if he gets 25 touches, he's going to probably greatly outperform his salary from a median perspective. Is he worth the 20+% ownership? We take a look down even at the ownership and like Marquise Brown, like that seems like a death trap because Marquise Brown, he could only end up with 3 receptions. Yeah, the 3 receptions, you go for 110 yards, right? But at 25% ownership, it's like, well, we know the Ravens offense. So like you're going with what you know, and I'm looking for the spots where what do we know about the Patriots without Brady and everything? Like who says Newton and Edelman don't go nuts on a crappy Miami team? Well, if you're going to wait for next week, well, by next week, they're going to be owned at those prices. I'm going to try to get them low. I'm going to try to buy low on uncertainty, not go all in or in it. I'd rather this week, my player pool is going to probably be the widest that I normally would make it. I'm going to play 150 lineups, and I may have a piece of nearly every game to some extent, and probably be very light on the high-owned plays. And then I'm going with what people think. Oh, the Eagles. Deshaun Jackson just going to walk in at 4,900 and start eight receptions but he's not that type of receiver to begin with. Who says that Greg Ward doesn't have 2 touchdowns? Who says that Dallas Goedert, they played the 12 personnel and Deshaun Jackson is just out running fly routes, not getting the ball. He's going to be 20+% owned because people think they know what's going to happen. I'd rather go and say, hey, maybe Lion stack, Stafford, Jones, Golladay. It's the Bears defense. But the correlation between from one year to the other on what the good teams and the bad teams and the matchups, you've done the analysis. It's much lower than people believe. So, I'm not going to just assume that the San Francisco defense is good anymore. I mean, they're probably better, right? I'm going to say there's going to be some baseline, but I'm not going in, hey, there's a new coach in Carolina. Who says Christian McCaffrey plays every snap? Maybe he only plays 75% of snaps now. Is that the likely scenario? No, he's probably going to be on the field 95+% of the time. But at 10K, if that ends up not happening because people think it's like last year, I'll be under on Christian McCaffrey as chalk. So I view it, I want to see the uncertainty. When we get to week 14, where we look around and there's no injuries and it's everything's kind of efficient, then there's nothing for me to exploit. I'm going maybe Seattle and Atlanta turn into a 20-7 game because the offenses can't move the ball and they're super owned. And then I'm playing Phillip Rivers with T.Y. Hilton and Paris Campbell or something, and they just run over the Jaguars for 49 points. Only because we don't know. Those are the unlikely scenarios. But I think that's more likely that unlikely scenarios happen in an uncertain market than in a certain one.
Who are your running backs with Pop this week? Who are your millionaire maker running backs this week?
I mean, I haven't made my player pool yet, but I mean, I could sort right by now. I mean, I think depending, even without the status of David Montgomery, Tariq Cohen for 4,900. I think I have no problem taking a shot on Le'Veon Bell, Chris Carson against the Falcons, Gurley, Joe Mixon at probably sub 10% owned, Sony Michel at 4,600 for the Patriots. Against the Panthers, maybe he gets 20 carries. Maybe it's Rex Burkhead. Who knows? I'm not going to be playing these guys in 30% of my lineups. But, I mean, I'm comparing it to the price. So, if Dalvin Cook is going to be half as owned as Christian McCaffrey, I'll play Dalvin Cook and I'll play him opposite in a secondary correlation with Devontae Adams. Because Devontae Adams obviously has a high ceiling. So, if Dalvin Cook breaks off a 70-yard run, that creates one big play, which turns the ball over to the Packers, and the game starts rolling. So, I'm looking at those. I'm looking at Austin Eckler. Maybe Austin Eckler, catches. Maybe everyone's assuming that Tyrod Taylor, he's a running quarterback, and running quarterbacks don't tend to throw to pass-catching running backs as often, historically. But that's we're coming up with just narratives that, where'd you get that from? Is it true? Is it going to be true in this case? Austin Eckler may end up with 90. Maybe he's on the field for 99% of the plays against the Bengals, and the Chargers just roll them over for 35 points. So, like, I'm looking at those types of situations. I'm not looking at, like, the chalk running backs. Like, everyone assumes Josh Jacobs doesn't catch the ball out of the backfield. They say he's going to catch the ball more. Well, what happens if I treat him as if he is going to do it? So I'm looking for those uncertain situations. Alvin Kamara, I'm not uncertain about. We've seen the Saints. The Saints haven't changed much. So to me, Alvin Kamara has a high ceiling, but there's no uncertainty there. I don't mind playing him, but I'm not going out of my way. Miles Sanders is going to be popular. So, like, I'm going out of my way to think in terms of, well, Doug Peterson just ends up running Boston Scott out there for no apparent reason. And everyone's just sitting around going like, well, my Sanders teams aren't doing well. And while everyone's going Aaron Jones, Jamal Williams is going to be there, but Dylan's there also. Aaron Jones is going to get screwed like he always does. Aaron Jones has had 4 touchdown games before. He's going to be 4% owned. Who says I can't play him? I mean, I know I'm naming like all the running backs or whatever, but I'm just finding places where what the crowd thinks is not 100%. So compared to their ownership, I just want to exploit that.
Jordan, you're talking a lot about attacking unknowns and trying to exploit them. Are you, in terms of filling out your lineup, are you trying to balance a lineup between exploiting unknowns and taking advantage of known good spots? Or are you just going at pretty much every position, like attempting to exploit unknowns? I guess I see, the benefit of attacking unknowns across the board throughout the lineup, good upside if you hit all of them correctly. However, they are unknowns because, people tend to avoid unknowns because there is inherent risk there. Are you trying to build lineups that like balance exploitations of unknowns with, I guess, valuable known quantities, or just trying to go unknown attack kind of across the board?
Well, I don't think I have to go all the way down. I mean, like, you don't need 1% players in the rest of your lineup. But like Brandon said, the more known commodities are at wide receiver to me. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm more likely, like, taking a look at wide receiver this week, I'm way more likely to be over on Thomas, over on Jones, over on Adams, over on even Thielen, Allen Robinson, DJ Moore, the lock. I'm much more likely to have them in a flex, even in a 4 wide receiver build, because they're knowns, but they're also knowns with high seal. I mean, like Brandon said, they have access to ceilings that other players don't. I'm not going with unknowns that maybe it turns out that Hunter Renfrow gets all the Raiders target. Like, what's the likelihood that Hunter Renfrow has an 8-catch, 120-yard, 2-touchdown game? Bet low. Like, I'd rather take a shot. I'd rather have a tight end at that price where I just need a touchdown to make value. I'm not going down and going, what happens if it's Russell Gage week? I'm not doing that. But in one-offs, that's not opposed to a stack. Like, I have no problem going after. I have no problem in my flex where everyone's playing Josh Jacobs, and in that lineup, I'm playing Aaron Jones for 5 times less ownership, because who knows? Maybe Aaron Jones. I mean, like, do we know what we think that we know? Josh Jacobs, from a median perspective, has like a 2-point higher median, but like 5 times less ownership. They'll go for a Mixon instead. So I'm looking for those spots to differentiate, but I'm not necessarily like, I'm not building my lineup where my running backs are like David Montgomery, Jonathan Taylor, and Devin Singletary, and then going like, yeah, individually, like, we don't know, and it could happen, but like now I need to hit like 3 times. It's like I need to hit like 3 separate, like 3 outer type of plays. They'll be mixed in my player pool, but I don't think you need to put all of them in one lineup.
Got it.
Maybe you could speak to a subtle stacking point. Jordan has mentioned a couple of times the idea of stacks that include running backs. So just for instance, the Dalvin Cook, Devontae Adams stack where you're having a dominant running back and running it back with the wide receiver. I'm wondering if you could maybe summarize some of our work on that. It's, for me, not a construction that I would use in a very large field. But if I recall our data on it, it's a little bit complex, and it depends a lot based on the type of running back you have. So, for instance, when Le'Veon Bell was in full swing with Roethlisberger, he was the type of back who was goal line, was pass catching, was most downs. Like you could easily have him as a high price, maybe the highest price running back, and then have a wide receiver from the opposing team who's also high priced. For me, based on the way running back salaries go now, it wouldn't be a good construction because
well, it's the price that both of them are very pricey.
Yeah, and like a lot of the high price running backs, to get there, they need game script in their favor, and they get there mostly in the second half, and they get there by running clock, and the clock is like the resource that you need if you're going to win a GPP. Like you need that's your expiration date. You need to have a lot of stuff happen before the clock ticks off, and every time the Josh Jacobs of the world get there, they're like ticking down that clock. And if you're running opposing wide receivers, it gets tough. It gets tough to get there, like for millionaire maker type scores. That's just my mindset. So I would be like inclined to play the like a low priced version of like Austin Eckler, and then run it back with a wide receiver. Like I could do that in terms of running back an opposing wide receiver. But for me, even like in the Seattle Atlanta game, even with like Chris Carson, like I would not like a Chris Carson Julio construction. That wouldn't be the way that I would naturally go. What do you have to say on that, Stuart?
Yeah, so we've actually done some good work around just correlation searching by player. You know, I think there's pretty well-known correlation matrices by position where, you know, RB correlates with DST a certain positive amount, and, you know, negatively correlates with quarterback and wide receiver a certain amount. And like that's all good. And like I think the premise of that is that you have a ton of samples of, you know, player roles correlating with other roles. But we've done some good work, I think, on just player specific correlations. So how individual players correlate with one another, and how they correlate with sets of players on the opposition. You know, because yeah, sure. Like wide receivers, competing wide receivers typically negatively correlate with one another. It's kind of a cannibalistic relationship, but there are certain teams where you actually see positive correlation between receivers that you would think compete. I think back to last year, Seattle was a team whose top two receivers, Lockett and Metcalf, had somewhat sneaky positive correlation. I think that was I'm not going to say unique, but somewhat rare situation that I believe, Brandon, you successfully exploited one week into a big payout. And you know, I don't know. I have my own hypotheses as to why that was.
I think it's because Metcalf is your end zone guy, and Lockett is your down the field guy, and so strangely, the Lockett's success actually sets up the Metcalf success in a way.
I mean, my hypothesis is that Seattle last year was super game flow dependent in terms of how their offense operated. So like games in which Lockett was succeeding were games that just really shifted Seattle to super pass heavy, such that it also benefited you know, Metcalf, you know, even though you would think that their kind of production would compete. You know, one stack we've talked about already, Chicago, I think, is super interesting this week with Tarek Cohen. You know, typically running backs don't have kind of a positive correlation triangle with wide receivers and quarterbacks, but you know, Chicago is an instance where you do have pretty good triangular correlation between running back Cohen, QB Trubisky and either, Miller or Robinson. So I think we've done some good work on, teasing out player correlation at a player level or correlation at a player level as opposed to like positional level to maybe find areas which could be exploited. The downside of this approach is that you're relying on small samples, right? I mean, Cohen, Trubisky, and let's say Anthony Miller have only played, a dozen games together, as we have, hundreds of samples of, backup running back, wide receiver, quarterback. But I do think what you trade in kind of sample size, you gain some, player specific relationships that maybe aren't readily available with kind of that standard positional correlation grid.
Right, and we're looking for correlation for upside. I mean, that's kind of the point. When one event happens, another event happens. So you don't have to rely on 18 different events in order to win, first place in a large field GPP like the Millie Maker. If you want to win $1 million, you should try to maximize your ceiling as much as possible. But I'm telling you, there are 100 million reasons why you should listen up right now. Because Draftkings, the leader in one-day daily fantasy sports, is celebrating the return of sports by giving away up to $100 million in prizes to all of their customers, including one lucky winner who will take home $1 million cash prize. So to claim your share of up to $100 million in instant giveaways, this is what you have to do. Download the app. I assume you already have the app. We're talking about DraftKings pricing, so I don't know why. Maybe you're on another site. But you should download the DraftKings app and sign up using the promo code DFF. Okay, DFF. Then enter the DraftKings free football survivor pool. It's really that easy to claim your share of up to $100 million in instant giveaways and put yourself in the running to win a $1 million cash prize. While the top prize is reserved for one lucky winner, everyone who signs up and enters DraftKings free football survivor pool will receive an instant bonus prize of at least $5 in value upon entering. So while you're in the app, don't forget to check out all the great daily fantasy contests DraftKings is hosting for the basketball, for golf, and obviously week 1 NFL action. So download the DraftKings app now and use the promo code DFF to claim your share of $100 million in instant giveaways and put yourself in the running for the $1 million cash top prize. That's promo code DFF to get your share of $100 million in prizes. Only at DraftKings. Eligibility restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com for details. Now, I know we talk about DraftKings and obviously FanDuel. Is there, obviously, because of the scoring system and half PPR, like FanDuel leans more towards touchdown equity. Like it's a little bit higher variance. And because the pricing tends to be a little bit softer, Brandon, is there anything that you do significantly different on FanDuel than DraftKings when it comes to these large field GPPs?
Sorry, I was just looking at my thing. I had a misclick on my. I found a misclick on my DraftKings page.
Did you accidentally have Christian McCaffrey in the line?
No, but I had a rare misclick, which is never fun. Okay, repeat the question.
Is there anything significant because of the FanDuel pricing and the fact that it's half PPR that makes your general, not just for week 1, but just in general? I know we talk a lot about DraftKings on this show, but there are people that may play on FanDuel. Like, is there anything significant? I think I'm more likely to stack on DraftKings than I am on FanDuel, only because like the interaction between players, such as quarterback, wide receiver, because you're only getting a half a point. I think I'm much more likely to single stack, do a 2+1, go touchdown hunting, more so than doing the big old 3+3 on DraftKings, where like if they have 86 plays in this game, like both sides, you're just gonna get 45 passes aside. You're just gonna rack up PPR points so much more. especially with the bonuses on DraftKings and not on Fanduel.
Yeah, I agree that stacking is much more important on DraftKings with the full PPR. Also, the pricing tends to be a bit tighter. I think that increases the case for stacking. And I think that your stereotypical FanDuel construction should be more paying up for running back, much less so on DraftKings. And that's just a function of with the half point PPR, it's just a lot harder for the running backs that don't have opportunity to get there. And you have a lot of viable cheap PPR running backs on DraftKings that will maybe not get the goal line work, not get the fourth down work, but get a lot of just pass catching plays, one of which might break off. On FanDuel, it's typically much harder going for those people, and you typically find that the best constructions have good running backs where if they get downhill, they can post a big score, like your mix and plus kind of thing. Yeah, so that's the difference for me.
Okay, so let's get down into the games. I don't think we necessarily have to go like for all the games, game by game, but I know that we've pointed out several games. I know that you've said that you're almost throwing out 2/3 of the games to begin with. I'm not doing that, but I mean, you already mentioned that, your key target is Seattle, Atlanta, and I'm going to tell you straight out, I'm going to be under on that game. So but it's only for me. I agree that it's probably the game to target, but it also is going to that's going to be what's going to be owned. So I'm weighing, yeah, I see why it is. But go into the matter of since you're saying you're not stacking as much. So are you just playing just Matt Ryan, Julio Jones and Lockett on the other side, kind of like a 2+1 type of deal and not like a 3+3, like a mega stack.
Correct. Many more of my lineups will be of that type, like the 2-1 kind of thing, or the 3-1. That's just the way that I'm going this week personally.
So for that game, is that essentially, is it Ryan plus Jones or Ryan plus Julio or Ryan plus Ridley, and then a Lockett Metcalf run back? I mean, we're not talking about Gurley or Carson. You already mentioned before, you don't even want those running backs.
Well, I will have other lineups that have those running backs that maybe have a max one of the receivers. So I'll have a lot of different possible paths for that game to go. But I won't have many lineups that just have lots of pieces from the same game. That's not really a way that I'm going.
Okay, so what other games stand out? We're throwing out 2/3 of the games.
I'm with you that Philly Washington is a good game. I think that Detroit Chicago is tempting. I won't have too much of that just because, as we've said, our work suggests that when the total is that low, you can kind of just trust the total and not necessarily go with it.
Well, if you go by totals, I mean, take a look at Baltimore, Cleveland. I mean, with the Ravens, Browns has a 48 total. So that kind of fits in that range. But what are the pieces that you want in this game? I don't view this game as stackable. I rarely view Lamar Jackson games as stackable to begin with. To do the Jackson, Brown, Andrews, it's just so obvious and it tends to be owned. Do you want to play OBJ or Landry on the other side? I get the total, but I'm not enthralled with the pieces. I'm more likely to play a Browns player if I'm playing that stack than play the stack by itself, because it's just if that stack gets there, I'm just sharing it with who you're not playing. Who's playing Miles Boykin? You're probably not doing that. So and we also have the Raiders Panthers game. That's at 47.5, so that's high enough for you. I know you're greedy with these over-unders. I don't mind going a little bit lower, but Who do you play in this? I mean, you don't want to play McCaffrey, and then what? You playing the passing game? You're playing the Bridgewater, Samuel, Moore, and then you don't want to play Jacobs on the other side, so you're playing Ruggs. I mean, yeah, it's doable, but I mean, it just.
Yeah, I think that type of just the one and one construction is fine for like Carolina Vegas, just receiver and receiver. I think that's fine. I also think that Lamar, in general, you don't want to pay up for QB for a very large field tournament, but I'm okay with the Lamar to Andrews construction for a very large field.
Because Lamar's ceiling for a quarterback, I mean, he has access to 40-plus points that no other quarterback really realistically has on a regular basis.
Yeah. And Andrews is very likely to be a top 3 tight end. So, like, if you have unusual spots elsewhere in your lineup, I think it's a fine starting point. Like, if you're going for, let's just say you're going for the Miami, New England, and you're trying to pick a Miami receiver and a New England receiver. I'm fine with making that an Andrews Lamar construction because those guys are very likely to hit at their respective positions. And so then you just need the unlikely parlay of the Miami and New England guys hitting as well. Also, spinning up on quarterback, it has traditionally been something you don't want to do in tournaments just because, for one thing, the separation of like QB1 versus QB5 most weeks is fairly limited. And also, you typically do get this pricing differential where the QB1 in price is like 50 to 60% more than like your middle price QBs, and on any given week, the middle price QBs will almost match QB1 for performance. So that's why people have tended to be off it. But then again, like, all else equal, you want to allocate more salary dollars to positions where the top options at that position have high expected fantasy point per dollar. And if you just look at a reasonable set of projections, often the QB position has the highest expected fantasy point per dollar for any given position. So it's not at all unreasonable to allocate to a Lamar. I don't mind the construction.
I'm just saying that he's not necessarily the greatest stacking. Like, he's the only quarterback that I consider playing without anyone. Like, just naked Lamar, that's it. But I'm still more likely to, like, if he puts up a 40-plus point score, like, he typically has cheap enough receive. Like, Marquise Brown this week is 5,100. I still have no clue why he's going to be 20+% owned. Like, he is by far the receiver that I am flummoxed on his ownership. Because, yes, he has a ceiling. He also has no floor. So, like, to me, his range of outcomes is so wide that in any DFS sport, my style of play is that the wider the range of outcomes gets and the more owned they are, the more likely I don't play them at all. And I want to play the wide range of outcomes guys that are 2%. Like, if they're low owned, as long as they're decent enough receivers. I'm not going down and playing 3K guys. I'm not saying Marquise Brown is not a bad receiver or anything, but I mean, if we take a look, even in his price range, like at 5,100, I mean, you could play at wide receiver. I'm scrolling down here, like Henry Ruggs. That's uncertainty. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen there. Marvin Jones. He's fairly wide range of outcomes, and he'll be way lower owned. The Buffalo guys, John Brown. We've seen John Brown put up humongous games. It may be different. Obviously, it's a horrible game environment. There's probably going to be wind. I'm not saying that him particularly. AJ Green says he's 100%. T.Y. Hilton, Emmanuel Sanders on the Saints. He's going to be 2% owned. These are all wide range of outcomes players that for a GPP, like, why am I playing 25% on Marquise Brown? Yes, I'll play him in a Lamar stack. I get it. But if I'm not playing Lamar Jackson, like, why am I taking the one off? I'm going to just not take him and hope he has an 8-point game and then he busts a quarter of the lineups in the GPP rather than eat that chalk. I mean, I get it that probably based on the distributional outcomes, he could pop. He is more likely shot of popping than any of the other receivers that I mentioned. But does he have a 5-time more likely, 6 times more likely? I doubt it. Am I not making any sense, or am I just missing something on Marquise Brown? You can tell me I'm missing something. You can tell me I'm wrong.
Well, see, I think when you talk about the wide range of outcomes, when you give me that, I'm okay with taking the high ownership along with it. And I don't care that the floor is very bad. Like that doesn't
You're not
matter.
playing for, I understand that, but all I'm saying is that if his, let's say, if we, instead of going by pop rate or smash rate, like the chances of him popping, I'm going by the chances of him failing, and I get so much more relative value by 25% of the field failing than by getting, if Marquise Brown goes for 32 points for 40, 50, 100, and I have him in my lineup, at 25% owned, you're going to need him. If you don't have him in your lineup, you're not winning the millie. But if you have him in your lineup, you may not even be cashing the millie. He's 25% owned. So how much are you gaining when he goes off? But like, I did well the week that Marvin Jones had a 4-touchdown game and he was 2% owned. Like, I gained so much more by taking shots on those players than by eating wide range of outcome chalk.
There's a number of similar.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to kind of shift this to a different game. So if we want to continue talking Brown,
I'll comment on this for 30 seconds, and then we'll go on that. I would just say the reason that I'm okay with taking him is because I think that the ownership stuff that you're talking about is absolutely crucial in a 500-person contest. When I'm thinking about the millionaire maker, I'm thinking that what makes so many of the lineups bad is that they don't have access to a high ceiling based on mistakes that they're making, perhaps on just a couple of positions. So I'm just trying to avoid those mistakes. And I'm okay if in the process of avoiding the mistakes, I get the very high upside, the very high volatility guy that happens to be high ownership. I think that in the millionaire maker, the fact that Marquise Brown fails, who cares? You've gained a little bit. You've gained on 25% of the field, but you still have to beat a lot of people. And for me personally, the ownership part of it in a millionaire maker context is not as important as it would be in the small and medium size contest. All right, Stuart, no more derailing, game by game.
So, I mean, I think, we've been talking about some of the high total games, and I don't know, I'm more interested kind of in it from a quarterback standpoint, but I was just looking at the, guys priced around Brown, and we got some injury news to come across, or I guess will shape this game out later in the weekend. But I mean, San Francisco to me is a game or a team that's sitting at a pretty good total. I think we've found that more so than any other position, game total, team implied team total correlates most strongly with the quarterback. And I mean, Baltimore is only a smidge over what San Francisco, implied total is. And, you got Garoppolo at a 2.5K discount. I mean, to me, that seems to be an interesting spot. And I think a lot of people will think that, think back to that playoff run for San Francisco in which they were so run heavy. How could you possibly play Garoppolo and, receiving core? San Francisco is going to run the ball, pass the ball 8 times. How could you possibly consider that team. But like, it's a great total. Arizona's a really good pace up matchup. I think there's a lot of interesting pieces on the other side of the ball. Receivers, running backs on the Arizona side. And, I think there's potential in San Francisco to have a really, really condensed, especially if, we'll see kind of if Samuel plays or not. And like, Samuel plays, I think he's at an incredible price. If he doesn't play, then I think like Kendrick Bourne or Brandon Ayuk are at a great price. George Kittle is, just gonna get his usual allotment of targets kind of one way or the other. I think to me, this is a really interesting game that might go overlooked for some of kind of the flashier pieces. And, I think there's a lot of potential with this stack for both the San Francisco team stack and just a San Francisco Arizona game stack as a whole. I
agree 100%. And Brandon's not. Brandon's going to say Kendrick Bourne has no pop. You can't play him, even though he's going to be less than 1% owned. Can't possibly play San Francisco, who have no receivers. So it's so much uncertainty. Can't touch it. Can't touch the uncertainty. Arizona, we don't know what the hell's going to happen with them. They have so many receivers and new pieces. Is Hopkins going to be good with a new quarterback? It's a game of entirely uncertainty, a lot of recency bias, like Stewart said. Oh, they're going to run the ball, and you have a three-headed monster. Who knows? Do you take any of the running backs? Who knows? Mostert, McKinnon, who knows who's it going to be? But all you're going to know is that, like, this game last year, both went over, and they both. And I mean, I don't want to use the whole, the 2-game sample size, but it's a 48 total, and it's not going to be a 48 total if San Francisco runs the ball 42 times. It can't possibly get to that if they're running 5 yards at a time. Like, it can't get up there. So there's going to be passing. Arizona could have 3 and outs all over the place. We saw that last year. And no one's going to touch this. I mean, like, the ownership on this game is, no, people don't want to pay up all the way for Kittle, even though he has access to obviously the highest tight end result. They're going to play Ertz. They're going to play guys in like the 4K, 5K range. And it's quite possible that if Garoppolo, even if let's say he only throws 30 times and he's 24 for 30. Well, all 24 could be, Kittle could have 14 catches and Bourne could have 8 catches. They both go over 100 yards. Kenyon Drake has, 80 yards rushing and 60 yards receiving in the touchdown. And he's cheap enough. Like, compared to the ownership, I'm taking a shot on this game. I don't care if Kendrick Bourne doesn't pop in your model, Brandon.
I like it. I like it. This is why we do these shows, get talked on to stuff. Okay, you mentioned Paris Campbell. I think Indianapolis is going to be a popular game.
Really? You think so? We don't have them as that owned.
I think Rivers Hilton is going to be somewhat popular. People perceive Jackson.
I think it's the opposite. I think people perceive Rivers as horrible. But I'm with you. No, I'm with you. If they're gonna, they're on my radar also. Only because of the ownership. I think Hilton as a one-off, you may see a bunch of, but I really don't think you're going to see a lot of the problem is that, like, do you want to run that back with what, DJ Chark or something? I look at, like, it's hard to even look at anyone on the Jacksonville side. I think I'm more likely to maybe take a shot on like a Chris Conley, but he's not going to pop. So like, if I play Indianapolis, I'm more likely to just play they just run them over. Like, I just play like Marlon Mack as a one-off, or I play like just a 3-man stack, just a simple, Rivers, Campbell, or Doyle with Hilton, and they just go and win 42-3 or something. And I don't need the other side of the game.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
But you think they're going to be high owned? I don't think so. I don't think Hilton will get past 12% ownership.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There's a lot of competition at his level. What about, I'm curious, the Chargers-Bengals game? I'm curious what you guys have to say about that.
I'm above on the Chargers passing game because I think the common thing is that Tyrod Taylor is a game manager, but the Bengals are most likely horrible. So, like, with Mike Williams is out, like I don't mind pairing Tyrod with Eckler even. I don't mind playing the quarterback running back with Keenan Allen or, something like that. This Guyton guy is 3K. I mean, he's not going to pop, but how much do you need in a stack from him? The only problem is that on the other side, I'd almost rather not have Mixon as my run back because just by the way that the Bengals, I know, but with Burrow, it's a whole new world in Cincinnati. I just feel that, like, if Mixon gets the ball 32 times this game, there's no way that the Chargers stack pays off. Like it's just gonna eat too much. I just don't. I'm more likely to take a Boyd or an AJ Green on the other side of the game than play Mix. I'll play Mixon as a one-off. I have no problem playing, him just by himself somewhere. But I just think that if they do what they did last year and just like they're down by 3 touchdowns and they're still running the ball at the end of the third quarter with Mixon going for 3 yards, like I just don't see how the other. I mean, the total's low. I mean, it fits your, 43 total. Like the likelihood of this game going off is low, but I think it's even lower if Mixon has a good game. Like if Mixon puts up 28 points, like I don't see where he just got off for an 80-yard run. Like I just see it more the fact that Cincinnati just kind of Burrow. They just like, this is his first game. We're just going to give it a Mixon, only 2 dump offs or something. And like, I don't see how the Chargers pay off their tags at that point.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there. But how
but
do you
like
see
you like the pieces of the game?
How do you see the Vegas Carolina game going?
I'm much more likely to play the problem is that I'd much more likely play the Carolina stack without McCaffrey. But then you think that the only way that like Bridgewater gets there, like McCaffrey's probably going to catch a bunch of balls anyway. Like I feel like I'm getting too much of a negative correlation. Like I almost like the pieces of the Carolina side because I can't see taking Bridgewater, McCaffrey, and Samuel or doing something. I don't see myself taking a 10K McCaffrey in a stack. I'd play him by himself if anything. I don't see Bridgewater paying off and all these guys paying off. McCaffrey has to put up 40 points to be viable, which means he's going to siphon off points from everyone else. But like the Raiders, like I think their distribution of targets is going to be wide enough that the stack in and of a car stack with like Ruggs and Edwards or Waller, like I think there's uncertainty there, but I think there's enough mouths to feed. We don't know what it's going to be. I'm more likely to take those guys as one-offs and hope that one of those guys, like it's the Ruggs game, it's the Edwards game, it's the Waller game, then stack this. Because if I play a 3-man stack of the Raiders, who do I run it back? Like I get Samuel or more, I guess, and just McCaffrey just sits there and does nothing. Like it's always hard to stack with these Carolina games because if you're not going to play McCaffrey, it's kind of hard to see that, yes, this game has a 47-48 total. If this game goes for 60-plus points, like McCaffrey's just going to eat too much of the production that you're going to want him in the stack and then have to hope that he puts up a 40-point game.
Yeah, I would not run a stack with him personally. I'm not going to play him at all, so.
So you're playing 0% McCaffrey?
Yeah.
Okay.
You guys have any interest in Jacobs as just a singular piece for this game? I know he lacks, traditional upside as a pass catcher, but I mean, God, this Carolina rush defense was terrible last year, and I don't really see any routes to improvement this year. I mean, I think he's a guy that could single-handedly kind of dominate this game for Las Vegas, not in a way that you'd want to really pair him with pieces of this game, but as kind of a one-off to alternative game stacks. Any interest there, or is he kind of a stay away for lack of pass catching upside?
Yeah, for me personally, I'm going to play so much of him at Fanduel that I won't play so much of him at DraftKings. I'll pepper in a lot of low-priced running backs before I use him. But that's just because he's easier to fit in at FanDuel. The FanDuel pricing is a little bit looser, and I like him for FanDuel scoring. I'll have him at DraftKings. I like him a lot, but I think for DraftKings, I'll try to take my chances on some of the lower-end guys.
Fair enough.
Talking about lower-end guys, support the RotoGrinders.
So Antonio Gibson, I haven't developed a view on him yet. I haven't developed a DraftKings position. I'm 100% on Tariq Cohen at a little bit more, but I haven't developed an opinion of what I'll do with Gibson.
I can't possibly see being anything close. 25% ownership on a 4K guy that well within one standard deviation of his range of outcomes is 6 touches. I mean, you have McKissick there, you got Love there, you got, obviously, they have the lowest total and the most likely bad game script. Like, just from an overall macro perspective, like, people are on to this shiny object. They're assuming, they're going, well, they got rid of Adrian Peterson. Gibson's going to be on the field all the time. We don't know anything. He's a rookie, and he's 25% owned because people are treating him like a $6,500 running back before he became he's not a $6,400 running back. And then you're sitting there and you're looking at the running back pool and you're going, this is what I do every week, Brandon. I do periscopes because there's always this guy, like at 17 weeks, there's always this cheap running back that walks into something. But it's this day and age in the NFL, there's always committees and everything. So, I mean, I take a look at that guy and everyone will be on my Periscope and go, what do you think of Gibson? Oh, Gibson, locking Gibson. And I go, what makes Gibson any different than Tariq Cohen? What makes Gibson any different from Sony Michel? Tell me. What's the difference between Sony Michel and Antonio Gibson? Like, well, Antonio Gibson, he could catch passes out of the backfield. Like, yeah, he could. Or he could not. What makes him any different than Chris Thompson then? Chris Thompson, okay, he could catch patches out of the backfield. Kerryon Johnson, what makes him any different than him? It's like, well, they got some other guy. Like, it's a 4K running back where the range of outcomes could be God knows what because they're in a committee and who knows what's going to happen. But who says Peyton Barber doesn't get 15 carries this game? I mean, like that's well within the range of outcomes. And I have people that are saying that Antonio Gibson locking in 80% of my lineups. And I'm like, you're nuts. Yes, if you're right, it still stems back to, like I said before with Marquise Brown. If you're right, what do you gain by it? Okay, now you share. Okay, you're at the cash line. Way to go. But if 25% of the people have him and he ends up with 6 carries for 30 yards and 1 catch for 8 yards, like, thank you. All I have to do is not play him in a lineup, and I have enough leverage that I just play the best plays without him. Like, that's kind of the theory. It's not the matter of, like, I'm going to play some 4% owned guy and then some weird stack and then try to win the millie. I'm still going after the players that are popping. I'm still going after the targeting very similar players to you, Brandon. It's just a matter of, yes, I don't mind playing Antonio Gibson in a lineup where I'm playing some really off-the-board stack. If I'm playing a San Francisco, Arizona stack with DeAndre Hopkins, I'll probably need a 4K running back. And yes, if he ends up having 20 to 25 touches and scoring a touchdown, he may be worth it. In that lineup, I could see having him. But in a bulk of the lineups, I'm just going to avoid having a 4K run. I could take so many other players that are 4K that have access to, a 15-point game? That's a touchdown and a couple of receptions that Like, why do I need to feel compelled to take on? Cash games. You're playing double ups. Okay, sure. Okay, go play him. That's no problem. What's the worst thing that happens? He gets 6 points and he's 60% owned, so who cares? But like, what makes him any different? Like, I'll take a shot on this. So many other guys. What makes him any different than Ronald Jones? What makes him any different than Kareem Hunt or Marlon Mack? I mean, they're a little bit more pride. Jamal Williams. What makes it? I mean, like, it's a running back in a committee that has the potential, but like, are you on board with this? Or you're more on board that Gibson has so much more likelihood of just walking into a bell cow role that at 4K, he really he could be 3K underpriced. So you better play him now and be over the field on.
Well, I guess my take is that for one thing, there is a real shortage of the underpriced running backs, the low price running backs with pop. So it's definitely worth giving him a lot of consideration because that group is very small. And if you look at the course of a season, there is always that week where you have there are always multiple weeks where you have the uber chalk running back who is very low on talent but high on opportunity, and he becomes 1/3 owned. That's the one that I like to avoid because the best case scenario for him is not that great. It's like 1/3 owned and he gets 18. I'd rather be off the low price chalk in that scenario. In a week like this, like I said, I haven't established my position exactly on Gibson, but my instinct would be that I would be inclined to be equal weight or overweight him because that it's so much value in terms of getting the ideal lineup construction. If you hit on the 4K, that it's okay that it's 25 or 30% owned. That's my instinct without having looked at his situation and the alternative situation super carefully.
Right. And I think we both say the same things while doing it differently. So for instance, if I'm not playing Gibson in a lineup, I don't mind Marquise Brown in that lineup. And if I'm not playing Marquise Brown in that lineup, I don't mind Antonio Gibson in the lineup. So it's not like I don't want to come across as like I'm Xing out Marquise Brown and Antonio Gibson from my player pool. It's just the matter of fact of like, yes, they have pop, right? Both of them for their salaries. They could be vastly underpriced. They have a very wide range of outcomes. But like I wouldn't want to have both of them in my line. Like I'd rather use that opportunity to get leverage by either not playing them, not playing a guy in that price range, such as my construction is completely different, or like just letting let's say in the instance that Gibson and Brown fail, and they're both 25% owned, I've essentially wiped. I haven't done anything. My lineup, who knows who's in my lineup? I've essentially destroyed half. I've destroyed 150,000 entries in a contest. So like that, you come at it from the upside perspective of like, is he going to be necessary to win? And I get that he's a higher probability, but I look at it from like, what can I do from a game theory perspective that makes your lineups I'm not competing against anymore? So if I could fade, if I'm not, let's say I'm not playing McCaffrey, we could agree that if you play McCaffrey, you probably have Gibson in that lineup, right? Because a 10K running back, you're probably going to need a cheap running back in the flex or something. So that's going to be correlated. So, and then Jacobs is probably going to be kind of chalky, 20%. And then Marquise Brown and Deshaun Jackson are going to be chalky in the wide receiver position. So like the combined ownership of all those players is like, if let's say there's an outcome where all of them do well. They all do well. Obviously, the Millie Maker winning score is going to be like 300 because they're all going to be super owned. They're all going to be ceiling outcomes. There's also another outcome where they all fail. And when they all fail, the winning score of the Millie Maker could be 200. I mean, could literally be very low because you have like 120% combined ownership.
I think that's the part where maybe we disagree. I think that that I feel like the chalk failing in the Millionaire Maker buys you a little bit.
Yeah, I did. I go along. I know Alex Baker, a well-respected, massively monthly entry player that goes as a well-known moniker, and he's first on the RG leaderboard. I play very similar to him, where in every sport where he does well when the scoring is low. That pretty much means that the chalk fails. So like in baseball, where the 80% don't starting pitcher gets blown up. Like you typically see the scores being low, but that goes along with my strategy of like targeting these mid-level games with these vomit type stacks, because like I'm not playing the stack because I think it's going to score 65 points. I think that it's a 42 total that's going to score 54, and the high scoring games fail. So in that case, I win. I have so many more outs because now I don't have 50% exposure to like a guy. Like if I'm fading, if I'm under on McCaffrey, Gibson, Deshaun Jackson, Marquise Brown, all those guys, I'm playing a player pool of 80 different players. So like I'm so light on those players that like I have all these outs. I've all like if Tariq Cohen has a good game, I probably have some good lineups with him. Kenyon Drake, if Aaron Jones instead of Josh Jacobs does well, like I'm playing every week for 17 weeks as I hope the chalk fails this week. How can I expose myself to as many different ways? Because I don't need a 300-point score now. Because if the chalk fails, like my stack could be, Stafford, Golladay, Jones could just be, Stafford has 303 touchdowns and Marvin Jones has 2, Golladay has 1, and just like these middling McCaffrey could put up 22 points and be in the winning lineup. Who knows? Because all the other chalk failed. So like I'm going with that mentality. I'm not going for the pop. I'm going for the burst. If there was a bubble, you want the pop of the bubble. I'm trying to pop it out.
I like it. Well, hey, I feel like we could talk for 6 hours. I think we pause, go watch the second half, and reconvene next week.
I don't even know what's going on. We're recording during the Chiefs Texans.
Oh yeah, it's 17-7 Chiefs. So
okay, who scored the touchdowns?
We've got David Johnson, Kelsey, and Sammy Watkins.
Oh, so I got a couple of lineups that should be
good. All right.
I got some Watkins. Watkins.
Jordan, I knew we would love it, and we loved it. It's really fun chatting fantasy with you. We're gonna have a good time this season.
So for Stuart Gibson, for Brandon Adams of it's Advanced Sports Analytics, I'm Jordan Cooper, aka Blenderhead. That has been the Advanced Sports Analytics Show on RotoGrinders.com.